The sound of sobbing carried across the dusty plains like a wounded animal's cry, and Samuel Crawford pulled his horse to a stop, every instinct telling him to investigate despite the setting sun painting the Colorado sky blood orange. He had ridden through Montrose that morning with barely a glance backward, another lonely town in a string of lonely towns. But now something about those desperate sounds made him turn his mount toward a cluster of cottonwood trees near a creek bed, where a figure huddled against the largest trunk. Samuel dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dry earth with a soft thud. The crying grew louder as he approached, and he could make out the shape of a woman in a dark blue dress, her shoulders shaking with each sob. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose from its pins, cascading down her back in waves that caught the dying light. She did not seem to notice him at first, so consumed was she by her grief. "Miss," Samuel called out gently, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. "Are you hurt?" The woman's head snapped up, revealing a face streaked with tears and dirt. Her eyes were swollen and red, but even in her distress, Samuel could see she was young, perhaps 23 or 24. She stared at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion, her hands gripping the fabric of her dress so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Please," she managed between gasps. "Please just go away." Samuel removed his hat, holding it respectfully in his hands. He was 27 years old and had seen his share of trouble in the Colorado Territory, but something about this woman's pain struck him differently. "I cannot do that in good conscience, miss. You are out here alone, and night is falling. The coyotes will be out soon, and worse things than coyotes roam these parts after dark." The woman let out a bitter laugh that dissolved into fresh tears. "What could be worse than what has already happened? Let the coyotes come. Let them all come." Samuel took a careful step closer, his voice calm and measured. "Tell me what happened." Those 4 words seemed to break something inside her. The woman looked up at him with such raw anguish that Samuel felt it like a physical blow. "Everything," she whispered. "Everything has happened, and I have nothing left. Nothing." He moved closer still and lowered himself to sit on a nearby rock, giving her space but showing he was not going anywhere. "My name is Samuel Crawford. I have been riding alone for more months than I care to count, and I have learned that sometimes the weight of a burden grows lighter when shared, even with a stranger." The woman wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, a futile gesture as fresh tears continued to fall. "Willa Walsh," she said quietly. "My name is Willa Walsh, and I suppose it no longer matters who knows it." Samuel waited patiently, watching as Willa gathered the strength to speak. The sun continued its descent, and he knew they would need to make a decision about shelter soon, but he sensed that rushing her would only drive her further into her shell of grief. "I came to Colorado with my father 3 years ago," Willa began, her voice hoarse from crying. "From Ohio. He had bought land near Montrose, planned to raise cattle and horses. It was going to be our new beginning after my mother died, just the 2 of us making a life out here in the West." She paused, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Samuel remained quiet, letting her find her own pace. 2 days ago, my father rode out to check on the herd in the north pasture. There had been talk of rustlers in the area, but he said he would be careful. He promised me he would be careful. Her voice broke on the last word, and she covered her face with her hands. "They found him yesterday morning. Shot 3 times. The sheriff says it was an argument over a land boundary with our neighbor, Marcus Trent. Says my father drew first, but that is a lie. My father was not a violent man. He would never draw on someone over a property line." Samuel felt anger rising in his chest. "Did they arrest this Trent fellow?" Willa shook her head miserably. "The sheriff says there were witnesses, two of Trent's ranch hands who swear my father was the aggressor. It is their word against a dead man's reputation. And now Trent has filed a claim saying my father owed him money, saying he has a right to our land to settle the debt. The judge is reviewing the papers, but everyone knows Judge Harmon and Trent are drinking buddies. I will lose everything. That is not justice, Samuel said firmly. Justice. Willa laughed bitterly. What is justice for a woman alone in the world? I have no brothers, no uncles, no husband to stand up for me. The bank will not talk to me because I am unmarried, and the lawyer in town says without money up front, he cannot help me fight Trent's claim. I spent this morning packing what few belongings I could carry and tried to decide where to go. But the truth is, I have nowhere to go. No family back east who wants me, no prospects, nothing. So I walked out here thinking perhaps I would just keep walking until I could not walk anymore. Samuel stood up slowly, his jaw set with determination. Miss Walsh, I may be just a drifting cowboy with not much more than a horse and a bedroll to my name, but I know wrong when I see it, and this is wrong in every way that matters. What can you possibly do? Willa asked, though her eyes showed a flicker of desperate hope. You do not even know me. I know enough, Samuel said. I know you are grieving and alone, and I know there are men in this world who prey on such circumstances. I cannot bring your father back, but maybe I can help you keep what is rightfully yours. Willa stood up on shaky legs, looking at him with a mixture of disbelief and cautious relief. Why would you help me? What is in it for you? Samuel put his hat back on and met her gaze steadily. Maybe I am tired of riding alone and seeing injustice everywhere I turn without doing anything about it. Maybe I figure it is time to make a stand somewhere, for someone. And maybe, he added more softly, I cannot stand to see a woman cry like that without at least trying to help. For the first time since he had found her, Willa's tears slowed. She studied his face in the fading light, searching for deception or hidden motives, but Samuel had the kind of honest, weathered face that came from hard living and harder lessons. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black in the twilight, and they held a steadiness that made her want to believe him. I have a small cabin on the property, Willa said finally. It is not much, but there is a barn where you could stable your horse, and I could make supper. It is the least I could do if you truly mean to help, Samuel nodded. I truly mean to help, Miss Walsh. Now let us get you home before full dark sets in. The ride back to Willa's property took less than an hour, with her seated behind Samuel on his sturdy bay mare. Willa had stopped crying, but Samuel could feel the occasional shudder that ran through her body as she struggled to maintain her composure. She directed him through a series of shallow creek crossings and over a low rise until a small cabin came into view, solid-looking despite its modest size, with a barn and a corral beside it. As they approached, Samuel could see the place had been well maintained. The fence rails were straight and newly mended in places, and the cabin's roof looked sound. Whatever else had happened, it was clear Willa's father had been a man who took pride in his work. He built most of it himself, Willa said quietly, as if reading Samuel's thoughts. Said a man should always make sure his daughter had a solid roof over her head. Samuel helped her down from the horse and led the mare to the barn while Willa went inside to light the lamps. The barn was small but well organized, with 3 stalls and a loft for hay. Samuel unsaddled his horse, rubbed her down, and made sure she had water and feed before heading to the cabin. Inside, Willa had lit 2 oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the single room. There was a stone fireplace along one wall, a bed in the corner, a small table with 2 chairs, and a cooking area with a cast iron stove. Simple but comfortable, the kind of place that spoke of practical people making do with what they had. Willa was standing at the stove, her back to him, and Samuel could see her shoulders were still tense with grief and worry. "I have some salt pork and beans," she said without turning around, "and coffee if you want it." "That sounds fine, Miss Walsh. Thank you." She turned to look at him then, her eyes still red-rimmed but clearer than before. "If you are going to help me, you might as well call me Willa. Miss Walsh makes me feel like a schoolteacher, and I am far from that. Then you should call me Samuel, or Sam if you prefer. Most folks who know me well call me Sam." They ate in companionable silence, both too tired and emotionally drained for much conversation. The food was simple but good, and Samuel found himself thinking it had been a long time since anyone had cooked a meal for him. His life for the past few years had been one of constant movement, never staying anywhere long enough to put down even temporary roots. He had convinced himself he preferred it that way, that the loneliness was a price worth paying for freedom. But sitting here in this warm cabin with this grieving woman, he realized how hollow that freedom had become. After they finished eating, Willa cleared the plates while Samuel nursed his second cup of coffee. "Tell me more about this Trent character," he said. "What kind of man is he?" Willa's expression hardened. "The worst kind. He owns the largest ranch in the area, the Trent T spread. Must be 4,000 or 5,000 acres with more cattle than he can count. But it is never enough for him. He has been trying to buy up all the smaller properties around here for years, making lowball offers and then getting nasty when people refuse. My father turned him down twice, said this land was going to be my inheritance, and he would not sell it for any price." "How many men does he have working for him?" "At least a dozen ranch hands, plus his 2 sons and his foreman, a mean snake named Garrett Hodge. Hodge is the one who really does Trent's dirty work." Willa sat back down at the table, her hands wrapped around her own coffee cup. "Sam, I appreciate what you said earlier about helping, but you need to understand what you would be up against. Trent has money and power. He has the sheriff and the judge in his pocket. One drifting cowboy, no matter how brave or well-meaning, cannot stand up to all of that." Samuel looked at her steadily. "Maybe not alone, but I'm thinking there must be other folks around here who have been hurt by Trent's greed, men who might be willing to stand together if someone gave them a reason to believe they could win." "They are all too scared," Willa said, shaking her head. "Trent has broken spirits along with hearts around here. After what happened to the Morrison family last year, everyone just started selling and moving on." "What happened to the Morrison family?" Willa's face paled slightly. "Their barn burned down in the middle of the night. They lost 20 head of cattle and nearly lost their youngest son, who was sleeping in the loft. The sheriff ruled it an accident, a lantern kicked over. But everyone knew. Everyone knew it was Hodge sending a message because Morrison had refused to sell. They left Colorado a month later, sold to Trent for a fraction of what the land was worth." Samuel felt his anger growing, but he kept his voice calm. "And nobody did anything. What could they do? There was no proof. There is never any proof when Trent wants something. People just disappear or have accidents or get arrested on trumped-up charges. He has this whole territory sewn up tight. Except he does not have your land yet," Samuel pointed out, "and you are still here." "Only because he is trying to make it look legal this time," Willa said bitterly. "Public opinion still matters somewhat, I suppose. If he just ran me off directly after killing my father, even his pet sheriff might have trouble explaining that away. So instead, he uses this fake debt claim to steal it with the judge's help. More civilized that way." Samuel set down his coffee cup and looked around the cabin again, this time with an eye toward defense. "How long did the judge say he would take to review the claim?" "A week, maybe 2. He said he needed to examine my father's financial records and compare them against Trent's documentation." Then we have a little time. First thing tomorrow, I want to ride into Montrose and do some asking around. There must be someone in that town who is not on Trent's payroll. A lawyer, maybe, or a businessman who has been hurt by Trent's monopolizing. Someone who would have an interest in seeing him taken down a notch. Willa looked at him with something like wonder in her eyes. You really mean to do this, do you not? You really mean to try? I never say anything I do not mean, Samuel replied. Now I will bed down in the barn tonight. You lock this door behind me and do not open it for anyone but me. If there is trouble, you fire a shot through the window and I will come running. Sam, Willa said as he stood to leave. Thank you. I know I already said it, but I need you to know I mean it. I was in a very dark place when you found me today. I do not know what I would have done if you had not stopped. Samuel felt something tighten in his chest at her words. You would have survived, Willa. I can see that strength in you, even if you cannot see it yourself right now. You are your father's daughter, and I am betting he raised you to be tougher than you think. After he left, Willa did lock the door as instructed. She changed into her nightdress and lay down on the bed, but sleep would not come. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the strange cowboy who had ridden into her life at its darkest moment. She tried to tell herself not to hope, not to believe that anything could change the inevitable outcome of her situation. But despite her best efforts, a small flame of hope had been kindled in her heart, and she found herself praying for the first time since her father's death that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. In the barn, Samuel made a bed in the hay and settled in with his rifle across his lap. He was too experienced to sleep deeply in unfamiliar territory, especially with the threat of Trent and his men hanging over everything. As he lay there in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the Colorado plains, he asked himself what he was really doing here. The honest answer was that he did not fully know. Yes, he hated injustice, and yes, he had a natural instinct to protect those who could not protect themselves. But there was something more, something about the way Willa had looked at him with those tear-filled eyes that had reached past all his carefully constructed walls. In that moment by the creek, he had seen not just her pain, but also her courage, the way she was trying so desperately to hold herself together, even as her world fell apart. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be needed, to have someone depend on him for more than just a day's work or a helping hand with a difficult horse. The life of a drifting cowboy had seemed romantic when he was younger, but now at 27, Samuel was beginning to understand that freedom without purpose was just another kind of prison. Morning came with the sound of a rooster crowing from somewhere near the cabin. Samuel rose stiffly from his hay bed, brushed himself off, and walked to the creek that ran along the edge of Willa's property to wash his face. The water was cold and clear, fed by snowmelt from the distant mountains, and it shocked him fully awake. When he returned to the cabin, he found Willa already up and making breakfast. She had pinned her hair back properly and changed into a fresh dress of simple brown cotton. Her eyes were still sad, but there was a determined set to her jaw that had not been there the night before. I have been thinking, she said as she poured him coffee, about what you said regarding finding someone in town who might help us. There is a man, Edward Griggs, who owns the general store. He has been here longer than Trent, came to Montrose back in '59 during the Pike's Peak rush. He is honest and fair, and he has never seemed intimidated by Trent the way others are. My father always said Griggs was the only man in town with any backbone. That is a good place to start, Samuel agreed. What about the newspaper? Does Montrose have one? It does, but the editor, Mr. Palmer, is in Trent's pocket. Prints whatever Trent tells him to print. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Still, a newspaper could be useful. Papers have a way of spreading stories beyond just one town. If we could get word out to Denver about what is happening here, it might bring attention Trent does not want." They ate quickly, and then Samuel saddled his horse while Willa hitched up her father's old wagon. "I am coming with you," she said when Samuel looked questioningly at the wagon. "This is my fight as much as yours, and I will not sit here hiding while you put yourself at risk for me." Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she would be safer at the cabin, but the look in her eyes told him it would be pointless. "All right," he said. "But you stay close to me in town, and if trouble starts, you do exactly as I say." "Agreed," agreed. The ride into Montrose took just over an hour. The town was larger than Samuel had expected, with a main street that ran for 3 blocks and was lined with the usual collection of businesses found in a prosperous cattle town in the year 1882. There was a bank, a hotel, 2 saloons, the general store Willa had mentioned, a church, a telegraph office, and various other establishments. People moved along the wooden sidewalks going about their daily business, and at first glance, it seemed like any other Colorado town Samuel had passed through. But as they rode down the main street, Samuel began to notice the undercurrent of tension. People who saw Willa in her wagon looked away quickly, as if afraid to be seen acknowledging her. A few women whispered to each other behind their hands, and one man actually crossed the street to avoid passing near them. "They are afraid to be associated with me," Willa said quietly. "Afraid Trent will turn on them next if they show me any kindness." "Then they are cowards," Samuel said flatly. "But maybe we can change that." They stopped first at the general store, a solid building with a false front that declared in painted letters, "Griggs Mercantile, established 1859. Samuel helped Willa down from the wagon and they entered together, a bell above the door announcing their arrival. The interior was dim and cool, smelling of coffee, leather, and the indefinable scent of a well-stocked mercantile. Shelves lined every wall, packed with everything from canned goods to tools to bolts of fabric. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up as they entered, and his weathered face broke into a smile of genuine warmth when he saw Willa. "Miss Walsh," he said, coming around the counter with his hand extended. "I am so very sorry about your father. He was a good man, one of the best I have known." Willa's eyes filled with tears at the first kind words she had received from anyone in town, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Mr. Griggs. That means a great deal to me." Griggs turned his attention to Samuel, his expression curious but not hostile. "And who might you be, young man?" "Samuel Crawford, sir. I am a friend of Miss Walsh's, and I am hoping you might be able to help us with a rather serious problem." Griggs looked between them, then walked to the front window and pulled down the shade, turning the sign on the door to closed. "I think you had better tell me everything," he said. They spent the next 20 minutes laying out the situation for Griggs, who listened with a deepening frown. When they finished, he removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully with a handkerchief. "I wish I could say I was surprised," he said finally. "But Marcus Trent has been a cancer on this town for years. He came here in '73 with money from back east, bought up the old Henderson Ranch, and has been expanding ever since. Every year he gets greedier, every year he pushes harder. And yes, he owns Judge Harmon and Sheriff Vickers both. Harmon gambles, you see, and Trent covers his debts. And Vickers, well, Vickers is just a mean son of a gun who likes having power over people. Trent gives him that power. Then there is no legal way to fight him." Willa asked, her voice heavy with despair. "I did not say that," Griggs replied. "The law is bigger than one corrupt judge and one bought sheriff. We are not completely without options, But it will take time, and time is something you do not have much of. What do you suggest? Samuel asked. Griggs thought for a moment. There is a federal marshal I know, name of Porter. Good man, straight as they come. He is based out of Gunnison, but he rides a circuit that includes Montrose. If we could get word to him about what is happening here, he would have the authority to investigate. Federal law trumps local corruption. How long would it take to reach him? Samuel asked. Gunnison is about 60 miles south. A good rider could make it in a long day, too, if the weather turns. But here is the problem. The moment Trent gets wind that someone is trying to bring in federal law, he will move fast. He might abandon the legal pretense and just take what he wants by force. Or worse, he might decide to eliminate the problem entirely. Samuel understood the implication. Then we need to be smart about this. Send someone Trent would not suspect, someone who would not be missed for a day or two. I could go, Griggs offered. I am old, but I can still ride, and I could claim I was heading to Gunnison for supplies. Trent knows I sometimes make that trip. It is dangerous, Willa said. If Trent found out you were helping me, he would retaliate. Griggs smiled grimly. Miss Walsh, I am 61 years old. I have been in this territory since before Montrose was even properly founded. I am tired of watching good people get crushed by bad men. If there is something I can do to stop it, then I figure that is as good a purpose as any to risk my old bones for. Samuel felt a surge of respect for the merchant. When can you leave? Tomorrow morning before dawn. That way I will be hours down the trail before anyone notices I am gone. But that means you two need to keep your heads down for the next few days. Stay at the cabin, stay armed, and do not trust anyone. Not the sheriff, not the judge, and certainly not anyone associated with Trent. There is one more thing, Samuel said. The fake debt claim Trent filed. Do you know anything about that? Where he might have gotten the forged papers? Griggs nodded slowly. I have heard rumors. There is a man named Simon Roth who does legal work out of a small office above the saloon. He is not technically a lawyer, more of a scrivener who helps people with contracts and such. Word is he has been known to be flexible with the truth when the price is right. My guess is Trent paid him to create documentation showing that Willa's father owed money. Could we prove it? Willa asked hopefully. Not easily. Roth is clever, and he would have made sure the documents looked legitimate enough to fool a cursory examination. The only way to expose the fraud would be to compare them against your father's actual records and find discrepancies. But even then, Judge Harmon could simply rule that he believes Trent's version of events. Which is why we need the federal marshal, Samuel concluded. Exactly. They talked for a few more minutes, working out the details of Griggs's trip to Gunnison and what Samuel and Willa should do in the meantime. When they finally left the store, both felt a measure of hope they had not had before, but also a keen awareness of how precarious their situation remained. As they walked back to the wagon, a man in a sheriff's badge stepped out of a nearby alley, blocking their path. He was in his early 40s, with a hard face and cold eyes that held no trace of warmth or humanity. Well, well, Sheriff Vickers said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Miss Walsh, I heard you were in town, and who might this be? New beau. This is Samuel Crawford, Willa said stiffly. A friend who is helping me settle my father's affairs. Vickers looked Samuel up and down with obvious disdain. That's so. Well, Mr. Crawford, I hope you are not planning on staying around here long. We do not take kindly to drifters in Montrose. Samuel met the sheriff's gaze without flinching. I will stay as long as Miss Walsh needs me, Sheriff. I am not breaking any laws. Not yet, maybe, Vickers said. But we have had some complaints about trespassers on the Trent T Ranch. Cattle rustling, too. Would be a shame if you got caught up in something like that. The threat was thinly veiled, and Samuel felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice level. "I am sure it would be. But seeing as how I have only just arrived in the area and have been with Miss Walsh the entire time, I do not see how anyone could mistake me for a trespasser or a rustler." Vickers's eyes narrowed. "You are a smart mouth, Cowboy. That is going to get you in trouble one of these days." "Is there something you wanted, Sheriff?" Willa asked, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger. "Or are you just here to harass us?" "Just doing my job, Miss Walsh. Just doing my job. You be careful now. Lots of dangerous characters around these days." "Why, your father found that out the hard way, did he not?" The cruel smile that accompanied these words made Samuel's fists clench, but he forced himself to remain calm. "We will be careful, Sheriff," Samuel said evenly. "Thank you for your concern." They walked past Vickers to the wagon, both acutely aware of his eyes boring into their backs. Samuel helped Willa up onto the seat and climbed up beside her, taking the reins. As they pulled away, he could see Vickers still standing there, watching them with a calculating expression. "He is going to tell Trent about you," Willa said quietly once they were out of earshot. "I know. Which means things are going to get more dangerous from here on out. Are you sure you want me to stay? I could ride to Gunnison instead of Griggs, bring back the marshal myself." Willa turned to look at him, and Samuel was struck by the intensity in her green eyes. "I am sure. I need you here, Sam, not just to help fight Trent, but because I do not want to be alone right now. Is that selfish of me?" "No," Samuel said softly. "It is human. And I am not going anywhere, Willa. Not until this is finished and you are safe." The ride back to the cabin was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Samuel found himself acutely aware of Willa sitting beside him, the way her shoulder occasionally brushed against his as the wagon bounced over the rough road, the scent of lavender soap that drifted from her hair. He had known her for less than a full day, but already he felt connected to her in a way that went beyond simple protectiveness. That night, after another simple meal eaten in companionable silence, Samuel prepared to return to the barn, but Willa stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Stay," she said. "Please, not in the barn. I know it is not proper, but I am so tired of being afraid. I am tired of being alone with my grief. Just stay here in the cabin tonight. You can sleep in the chair by the fire. I just need to know someone is here." Samuel looked into her eyes and saw the raw vulnerability there, the desperate need for human connection in the face of overwhelming loss. He knew he should refuse, knew that staying would only complicate an already complicated situation, but he found himself nodding. "All right," he said. "I will stay." They talked late into the night, the kind of deep conversation that happens between two people who have nothing left to lose. Willa told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her mother's death from fever when Willa was 19, about the decision to come west and start over. She spoke of her father with a love and respect that made Samuel's heart ache, understanding now just how much she had lost. In turn, Samuel told her about his own past, things he rarely shared with anyone. He spoke of growing up in Kansas, the son of a farmer who had struggled to make a living from stubborn land. He told her about joining the Union Army at 17 in the final year of the war, too young to really understand what he was getting into, and coming home to find his parents had both died of influenza while he was gone. He explained how he had sold the farm because he could not bear to work it alone, and how he had been drifting ever since, looking for a place to belong but never quite finding it. "That is why you stopped for me," Willa said softly. "You understand what it is like to lose everything." "Maybe," Samuel admitted. "Or maybe I just saw a woman in trouble and knew I had to help. Does the reason really matter?" "It does to me," Willa said. "Because it means you understand. You are not just some knight trying to rescue a damsel. You know what this pain feels like." Samuel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked into the dying fire. "I spent a long time trying to outrun my pain, Willa. Thought if I just kept moving, kept never staying anywhere long enough to feel anything, it would eventually stop hurting. But it does not work that way. The pain just follows you, waiting for a quiet moment to remind you it is still there." "Then how do you bear it?" Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I guess you bear it by finding something worth bearing it for, a reason to keep going even when everything feels hopeless." He turned to look at her. "And maybe by finding someone to share the burden with." Their eyes met and held, and Samuel felt something shift between them, a recognition that what was happening here was about more than just fighting Marcus Trent or saving a piece of land. Something real and profound was beginning to grow in the space between them, born out of shared pain and mutual understanding. Willa broke the moment by standing up and moving to the small trunk where she kept her father's papers. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling out a leather-bound journal. "My father kept records of everything. Every penny spent, every head of cattle bought or sold, every transaction. If Trent claims my father owed him money, it will not be in here." Samuel took the journal and began carefully reviewing the entries. Willa's father had beautiful, precise handwriting and a methodical mind. Every entry was dated and detailed, showing a picture of a man who ran his ranch carefully and honestly. There was no mention of any debt to Marcus Trent, no loan or agreement or anything else that could justify the claim. "This is good," Samuel said. "If the marshal sees this, combined with testimony from people like Griggs about Trent's pattern of behavior, it should be enough to at least launch an investigation. And once people see that Trent can be challenged, others might find the courage to speak up about their own experiences with him." "Do you really think it could work?" Willa asked. "Do you think we actually have a chance?" "I think we have more than a chance. I think we are going to win this, Willa, but I need you to believe it too. I need you to hold on to that hope even when things get difficult." Willa nodded, but Samuel could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. He understood it. Hope was a dangerous thing when you had already lost so much. Every time you allowed yourself to believe things might get better, you opened yourself up to even greater heartbreak if they did not. "I am trying," she said softly. "But I am so afraid, Sam. Afraid of losing this place, afraid of what Trent might do to you for helping me, afraid of being alone again." Without thinking, Samuel reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold and he wrapped his own around them, trying to share his warmth. "You are not alone, Willa, not anymore. Whatever happens, we face it together." She looked down at their joined hands and a single tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it was not entirely a tear of sadness. There was something else there too, a glimmer of possibility, of connection, of maybe something more. The next morning, Samuel was up before dawn, his body accustomed to early rising from years of cowboy life. He rekindled the fire and put coffee on to boil, then went outside to care for the horses. The morning air was crisp and clean, and the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold. When he returned to the cabin, Willa was up and dressed, her hair neatly pinned and her face washed. She looked more rested than she had the day before, though the shadows under her eyes spoke of grief that would not fade quickly. "Griggs will be leaving for Gunnison about now," she said, pouring them both coffee. "I pray he makes it safely." "He will," Samuel said with more confidence than he felt. "He strikes me as a man who knows how to take care of himself." They spent the day working around the property, both because there were chores that needed doing and because it gave them something to focus on besides their worries. Samuel repaired a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm, while Willa tended her small vegetable garden and fed the chickens. It was strangely domestic, and Samuel found himself imagining what it would be like to do this every day, to have a place to call home and someone to share it with. Around midday, as they were taking a break for lunch, Samuel noticed a rider approaching from the direction of Montrose. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle he now kept close at all times, but as the rider drew nearer, he could see it was a young man, barely out of his teens, riding a mule and looking nervous. "That is Tommy Griggs," Willa said, shading her eyes against the sun. "Edward's grandson." "What is he doing here?" They waited as the young man rode up and dismounted, his face flushed with exertion and worry. "Miss Walsh, Mr. Crawford," he said breathlessly. "My grandfather asked me to bring you a message." He wanted to leave at dawn like he planned, but Sheriff Vickers showed up at the store late last night. Told my grandfather that he was not to leave town for the next week, said there was going to be an investigation into some missing supplies, and he needed to be available for questioning. Samuel cursed under his breath. "Trent moved faster than we thought." "That is not all," Tommy continued. "After the sheriff left, a man came by, one of Trent's ranch hands. He did not say anything directly threatening, but he made it real clear that my grandfather had better watch his step. Said accidents happen to people who stick their noses where they do not belong." Willa's face had gone pale. "Is your grandfather all right?" "He is scared, Miss Walsh, but he is all right. He told me to tell you that he is sorry, but he cannot make the trip to Gunnison now. If he defied the sheriff's order, they would arrest him, and then he could not help you at all." Samuel's mind was racing. Trent had clearly gotten wind of their visit to the Mercantile and moved to shut down their avenue to the federal marshal, which meant they needed a new plan, and quickly. "Thank you for riding out here to tell us, Tommy," Samuel said. "You head back to town now and tell your grandfather we understand. Tell him to keep his head down and not do anything that might provoke Trent further." After the young man left, Willa turned to Samuel with desperation in her eyes. "What do we do now? Griggs was our best chance." "Then I go to Gunnison myself," Samuel said decisively. "I will leave tonight, ride through the darkness when Trent's men will not be watching. I can be in Gunnison by tomorrow evening, find Marshal Porter and bring him back here." "But that means leaving me alone," Willa said, and Samuel could hear the fear in her voice. "What if Trent decides to move while you are gone?" It was a valid concern, and Samuel wrestled with it. He did not want to leave Willa unprotected, but he also could not see any other way forward. Unless. "What about your neighbors?" he asked. "The ones on the other side from Trent. Are any of them friendly? Anyone you could stay with while I am gone?" Willa thought for a moment. "There is the Fletcher family. They have a ranch about 5 miles east of here. Sarah Fletcher was friendly with my father, and she has been kind to me in the past. She has 3 grown sons who work the ranch with her husband. Trent has not bothered them, maybe because old Ben Fletcher was a Texas Ranger back in the day and is not someone you want to cross." "Perfect," Samuel said. "We ride over there this afternoon, explain the situation, and ask if you can stay with them for a couple of days. Then I head to Gunnison tonight, and you will be safe with the Fletchers until I get back." It was not a perfect plan, but it was the best option they had. They quickly packed a bag for Willa with a few days' worth of clothes and necessities, then hitched up the wagon and headed east toward the Fletcher ranch. The Fletcher place was larger and more prosperous-looking than Willa's property, with a substantial main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals filled with horses. As they pulled up, a woman in her 50s came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She had gray-streaked brown hair and the kind of strong, capable face that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and raising children in a difficult land. "Willa Walsh," Sarah Fletcher said warmly, coming down the steps to embrace the younger woman. "We were so sorry to hear about your father. I wanted to come see you, but—" She trailed off, and Willa understood the unspoken words, but I was afraid of what Trent might do. "It is all right, Sarah," Willa said. "I understand, but I am here now because I need help, and I am hoping you and Ben might be willing to provide it." They explained the situation, and Sarah's face grew increasingly troubled as she listened. "That devil," she muttered when they finished. "Marcus Trent is a stain on this whole territory. Come inside, both of you. Ben and the boys are out with the herd, but they will be back for supper, and we can discuss this properly." Inside the Fletcher home, Sarah served them fresh bread and butter while they waited for her husband and sons to return. When they finally arrived, dusty and tired from a day's work, Sarah quickly filled them in on what was happening. Ben Fletcher was a tall, lean man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much violence to ever be completely at ease. When Sarah finished explaining, he sat back in his chair and studied Samuel and Willa with the assessing gaze of a man who had learned to judge character quickly. "You are asking to bring trouble to our doorstep," he said bluntly. "If we shelter Miss Walsh while you go to Gunnison, Trent will find out, and he will not be happy about it." "I know, sir," Samuel said respectfully. "And I would not ask if there were any other option, but Miss Walsh needs protection, and I need to bring back the federal marshal. You are the only people in this area I trust to keep her safe." "Why should we risk it?" asked the oldest Fletcher son, a man of about 30 named Jack. "We have managed to stay on Trent's good side by minding our own business. Why throw that away?" Before Samuel could answer, Ben held up a hand. "Because minding our own business is just another word for cowardice, son. I taught you better than that." He turned to Willa. "Your father was a good man, Miss Walsh. He helped us out last year when we had that bad winter and lost a quarter of our herd. Loaned us some breeding stock without asking for anything in return. Said neighbors had to look out for each other. I reckon it is time we returned that favor." "Thank you," Willa said, her voice thick with emotion. "You do not know what this means to me." "I know exactly what it means," Ben said. "It means you got a chance to keep what is yours. And Mr. Crawford, you get yourself to Gunnison fast and bring back that marshal. We will keep Miss Walsh safe, but I cannot promise how long we can hold out if Trent comes calling with his whole crew." Samuel stood and extended his hand. "I will be as fast as humanly possible, Mr. Fletcher. You have my word." "That is all any man can offer," Ben replied, shaking his hand firmly. Samuel and Willa had a few minutes alone outside while Samuel prepared his horse for the long ride ahead. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and there was a tenderness in the air that made everything feel more poignant. "Be careful," Willa said, her hand on his arm. "I know we have only known each other for 2 days, but the thought of something happening to you—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Samuel covered her hand with his own. "I will be careful, and when I come back we are going to end this, Willa. We are going to make sure you keep your land, and that Trent faces justice for what he did to your father. Promise me," she said urgently. "Promise me you will come back." "I promise," Samuel said, and then, without thinking about the consequences or the propriety of it, he leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead. "Wait for me." Willa's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she nodded. I will wait for you, Sam." He mounted his horse and turned toward the south, toward Gunnison and the federal marshal, who represented their only real hope. As he rode away, he looked back once to see Willa standing in the fading light watching him go, and his heart clenched with an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years. He was falling in love with her. It was too fast, too unexpected, too complicated, but it was undeniably true. And that knowledge drove him forward into the gathering darkness with a determination he had never known before. He was not just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for a future, for the possibility of a life that meant something, for the woman who had unknowingly awakened something in him he thought had died long ago. Samuel pushed his horse hard through the night, stopping only briefly to rest and water the animal. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see the trail, and he made good time despite the darkness. His mind churned as he rode, thinking about Willa, about Trent, about everything that had happened in the past 2 days. By the time dawn broke, he was already 30 miles from Montrose, and by midday he could see the peaks around Gunnison rising in the distance. He stopped at a small creek to let his horse rest and drink, eating a hasty meal of jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. As he sat there, Samuel heard the sound of riders approaching. He tensed, his hand moving to his gun, but relaxed slightly when he saw it was a group of 3 cowboys, likely ranch hands heading somewhere on business. They nodded to him as they passed, and Samuel tipped his hat in return. But something about the encounter nagged at him. One of the men had looked at him a moment too long, with a glimmer of recognition that did not make sense. Samuel had never seen any of them before, which meant only one thing: they had been told to watch for him. Trent had anticipated his move to Gunnison. Samuel cursed himself for not being more careful. Of course, Trent would have thought of this. The man had not built his empire by being stupid. He would have men watching the road to Gunnison. And now they knew Samuel was on his way to bring back the marshal, which meant Samuel had to move even faster, and he had to be ready for trouble when he reached town. He pushed on, his exhaustion forgotten in the urgency of the situation. His horse was tiring, but the animal was tough and willing, and Samuel promised himself he would see the mare well cared for when this was all over. Gunnison came into view in the late afternoon, a town somewhat larger than Montrose, built in a valley with the Gunnison River running through it. Samuel rode straight to the federal building, a solid stone structure near the center of town that housed the marshal's office. Inside, he found a young deputy sitting at a desk, sorting through wanted posters. The deputy looked up as Samuel entered, taking in his dusty clothes and exhausted appearance. "Help you?" the deputy asked. "I need to see Marshal Porter," Samuel said. "It is urgent. The marshal is out on rounds right now. Should be back tomorrow or the day after." Samuel felt his heart sink. "Tomorrow or the day after. I rode 60 miles to see him. This cannot wait." The deputy looked apologetic but unmoved. "Sorry, friend. He is investigating a series of stage robberies up near Crested Butte, but if you want to leave a message, I can make sure he gets it as soon as he returns." Samuel quickly weighed his options. He could wait in Gunnison for the marshal to return, but every day he waited was another day Willa was in danger, and another day Judge Harmon had to rule on Trent's fraudulent claim. Or he could head to Crested Butte himself and try to find Porter, but that would add at least another day to his journey. "Can you tell me exactly where he went?" Samuel asked. "What route he was taking?" The deputy hesitated. "I am not supposed to give out that information." "But I can see you are desperate. What is this about?" Samuel briefly explained the situation in Montrose, and he could see the deputy's expression growing more serious as he listened. When Samuel finished, the deputy nodded slowly. "I have heard stories about Marcus Trent. Nothing I could ever prove but stories. If even half of them are true, he is as bad as they come." He pulled out a map and pointed to a location. Marshal Porter was planning to check in with the sheriff in Crested Butte, then investigate the robbery sites along this stretch of road. "If you ride hard, you might catch up with him tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Samuel said gratefully. "This means everything." The deputy gave him the name of a stable where he could get a fresh horse, and Samuel quickly made the arrangements, leaving his own exhausted mare to be cared for and boarding a younger, stronger mount. He hated to push on without proper rest, but time was running out. He rode through the evening and into the night again, following the route the deputy had indicated. His body screamed for sleep, but he forced himself to stay alert, knowing that one moment of inattention could mean disaster. Dawn found him on a mountain road, picking his way carefully through rocky terrain. He had been riding for nearly 24 hours straight, and even his iron will was beginning to falter. He was just considering stopping for a brief rest when he saw a rider coming toward him. The man wore a badge on his vest, and as he drew closer, Samuel could see he was in his 40s, with a weathered face and alert eyes that missed nothing. "Marshal Porter," Samuel called out. The rider pulled up, his hand resting casually on his gun. "That is right. And who might you be?" Relief flooded through Samuel. "My name is Samuel Crawford, and I have ridden from Montrose to find you. There is a situation there that requires federal intervention, and we do not have much time." Porter studied him carefully. "You look like you have been through hell, son. Why do not you tell me what this is about?" For the third time in as many days, Samuel laid out the story of Willa Walsh, her murdered father, Marcus Trent's corruption, and the conspiracy of local officials to steal her land. Porter listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. When Samuel finished, the marshal was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have been hearing whispers about Marcus Trent for months now. Nothing concrete enough to justify an investigation, but enough to make me suspicious. If what you are telling me is true, this could be exactly what I need to bring him down." "It is true, Marshal. Every word, and I have evidence to prove it." Willa's father kept meticulous records that contradict Trent's claim of debt, and there are witnesses like Edward Griggs who can testify to Trent's pattern of intimidation and land theft. Porter nodded decisively. "All right, Mr. Crawford. I am coming back to Montrose with you. But I need you to understand something. Federal investigations take time and they have to be done by the book. I cannot just ride in and arrest everyone you think is corrupt. I need evidence, testimony, proper documentation." "I understand," Samuel said. "But time is the one thing we do not have much of. The judge is set to rule on the land claim any day now, and if he does, Willa loses everything. And there is another problem. I am almost certain Trent has men watching for me. They know I came to find you." "Then we need to be smart about this," Porter said. "We will ride back together, but we will take a different route, one that bypasses the main road. I know these mountains well. I can get us to Montrose without being seen. And when we arrive, I want to come in quietly, without fanfare. The element of surprise is going to be our greatest advantage." They rode together through the day, with Porter leading them over mountain trails that Samuel would never have found on his own. The marshal proved to be good company, with a dry sense of humor and a deep commitment to justice that reminded Samuel of why he had sought the man out in the first place. As they rode, Porter asked questions about Willa, about her father, about the details of the land and the ranch. But Samuel noticed the marshal also asked personal questions about Samuel's own background and his relationship with Willa. "You care about her," Porter observed at one point. It was not a question. Samuel did not see any point in denying it. "I do. I know it seems fast, but yes, I care about her a great deal." "Love often happens fast out here in the West," Porter said. "Life is hard and short, and people do not have the luxury of long courtships. I met my wife and married her within a month. That was 15 years ago, and I have never regretted it for a moment." "Assuming we survive this," Samuel said, "assuming we can save her land and bring Trent to justice, I plan to ask her if she will let me stay. Build a life there with her." Porter smiled. Then we had better make sure we do this right. They reached the outskirts of Montrose late in the evening of the second day since Samuel had left. True to his word, Porter had brought them in by a back route that avoided the main road entirely. They bypassed the town itself and headed directly for the Fletcher ranch. As they rode up, Samuel could see Ben Fletcher standing on the porch with a rifle in his hands. But when the old rancher recognized Samuel, he lowered the weapon and called out, "Thank God you are back. We have had trouble." Samuel's heart seized. "Is Willa all right?" "She is fine, but it was close. Trent's foreman and 4 of his men showed up yesterday morning, claiming they had reports of stolen horses on our property. Demanded to search the place. I told them to go to hell, and they did not like that much." Things almost got ugly, but Willa came out of the house with a shotgun and told them if they did not leave, she would start shooting. "That girl has got spine, I will give her that." They left, but they said they would be back with the sheriff. Marshal Porter stepped forward, his badge catching the lamplight. "I am Federal Marshal James Porter, Mr. Fletcher, and I can assure you that Sheriff Vickers will not be troubling anyone much longer." Ben's weathered face broke into a fierce grin. "Is that so? Well then, Marshal, you are a welcome sight indeed." Samuel barely heard the rest of the conversation. He was already heading for the house, where he could see Willa standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the warm light from inside. She saw him and ran down the steps, and Samuel caught her in his arms, holding her tight. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "You really came back." "I promised I would," Samuel said, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the rightness of her in his arms. "I brought the marshal. It is going to be all right now, Willa. Everything is going to be all right." She pulled back enough to look up at him, and in her eyes he saw relief and joy and something deeper, something that made his heart pound. "I was so afraid," she said. "Afraid you would not make it back in time. Afraid they would do something to you. Afraid I would lose you before I even really had you." Samuel cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears on her cheeks. "You have me, Willa. For as long as you want me, you have me." And then he kissed her, not gently like before, but with all the passion and fear and relief he had been holding inside for the past 2 days. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands gripping his shirt, and for a moment the whole world fell away and there was nothing but the two of them together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily because they were true. "I know it is fast and I know we barely know each other, but I love you, Willa Walsh, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Willa's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were tears of joy. "I love you too, Sam. I think I started loving you the moment you stopped to help me when everyone else had turned away. Stay with me. When this is over, stay with me and help me build a life here." "I am not going anywhere," Samuel promised. "This is where I belong, with you." Inside the Fletcher home, Marshal Porter had taken over the dining room table and was meticulously going through all the evidence Samuel and Willa had gathered. He examined Willa's father's journal, reviewed the suspicious timing of the debt claim, and took detailed statements from both Willa and Samuel about everything that had happened. "This is good," he said finally. "Very good." Between the financial records, the testimony from Mr. Griggs about Trent's pattern of behavior, and the suspicious circumstances of your father's death, I have more than enough to justify a full investigation. Tomorrow morning, I am going to ride into Montrose and start with Sheriff Vickers. I am going to ask him some very pointed questions about the investigation into your father's death, Miss Walsh, and I am going to make it very clear that he is now under federal scrutiny." "What about Judge Harmon?" Willa asked. "What about the land claim?" "I will visit the judge as well," Porter said. and I will inform him that any ruling on the debt claim is to be postponed pending my investigation. He is not going to like it, but federal authority supersedes local jurisdiction. He will comply or face obstruction charges. And Trent himself?" Samuel asked. Porter's expression hardened. "Mr. Trent is going to learn that there are consequences for murder and corruption, but I need to be careful here. A man like that, with his money and connections, he will have expensive lawyers. I need to build an airtight case before I move against him directly. That means gathering more evidence, finding more witnesses, documenting everything he has done. It will take time." "How much time?" Willa asked anxiously. "A few weeks, maybe a month." "I know that seems like a long time, but I promise you, Miss Walsh, I will see this through. Marcus Trent will face justice for what he did to your father." They spent the rest of the evening planning the next steps. Porter would stay at the Fletcher Ranch for the night, then ride into Montrose in the morning with an official presence. Samuel and Willa would come as well, making it clear that Willa was under federal protection now. That night, Samuel and Willa sat together on the Fletcher's porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Colorado sky. The night was cool, and Samuel draped his jacket around Willa's shoulders, drawing her close against him. "You really think it will work?" Willa asked quietly. "Do you think Porter can stop Trent?" "I do," Samuel said. "I have known a lot of lawmen in my time, and Porter is the real thing. He is not going to let this go, and he is not going to be intimidated. Trent has operated with impunity for so long because he controlled all the local authority. But federal law is different. It is bigger than one corrupt judge and one bought sheriff." Willa was quiet for a moment, then said, "What will you do after this is over?" "I meant what I said about wanting you to stay, but I need to know if that is really what you want. I do not want you to feel obligated because you helped me." Samuel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Willa, I have been drifting for years, looking for a place to call home without even really knowing that is what I was searching for. I thought I wanted freedom, wanted to be able to go wherever I pleased without any ties or responsibilities. But the truth is, I was just running away from the pain of losing my family, from the fear of caring about something and then losing it. Meeting you changed that. You changed that." "How?" Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you showed me that having something to lose is what makes life worth living. Yes, caring about you scares me. Yes, the thought of building a life here and then something happening to take it all away terrifies me. But you know what scares me more? The thought of spending the rest of my life alone, never taking that risk, never knowing what we could have together." Willa's eyes glistened with tears in the starlight. "I am scared too," she admitted. "My father was everything to me, and losing him nearly destroyed me. The idea of opening my heart to someone else, of being that vulnerable again, it is terrifying." "Then we will be terrified together," Samuel said with a small smile. "And maybe being terrified together is better than being safe and alone." Willa laughed softly, then leaned in and kissed him. "I think I like the sound of that." The next morning, Marshal Porter, Samuel, and Willa rode into Montrose together. Porter had pinned his federal badge prominently on his vest, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had faced down outlaws and corrupt officials many times before. Their first stop was the sheriff's office. Vickers was sitting behind his desk when they entered, and his face went pale when he saw the federal marshal's badge. "Sheriff Vickers," Porter said formally. "I am Federal Marshal James Porter, and I am here to investigate several serious allegations regarding your handling of the murder of Robert Walsh and related corruption charges." Vickers tried to bluster. "I do not know what you have been told, Marshal, but I ran a proper investigation into Walsh's death. It was a clear case of self-defense by Marcus Trent's men. I have witnesses. Witnesses who work for the accused, Porter said coldly. That alone should have been enough to warrant deeper scrutiny. But instead, you closed the case within 24 hours. That shows either incompetence or corruption, Sheriff. Which one should I put in my report? Vickers's eyes darted around like a trapped animal. Now hold on, Marshal. I was just doing my job. If you have a problem with how things are done in Montrose, maybe you should talk to Judge Harmon. Oh, I intend to, Porter assured him. But first, I am going to need you to hand over all your files related to the Walsh case. Every report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence, and you are going to do it right now. For a moment it looked like Vickers might refuse, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat and he pulled out a thin folder from his desk drawer. Here, he muttered. But you are wasting your time. Trent has lawyers that will tie you up for years. Let me worry about that, Porter said, taking the folder. And Sheriff, consider yourself under investigation. I will be watching everything you do from here on out. One wrong move, one hint that you are trying to interfere with my investigation or intimidate witnesses, and I will have you arrested for obstruction of justice. Are we clear? Vickers nodded miserably, all his earlier bravado gone. From the sheriff's office, they went to see Judge Harmon. The judge was in his chambers, and he greeted them with false warmth that disappeared the moment he saw Porter's badge. Judge Harmon, Porter said, I am here regarding the debt claim filed by Marcus Trent against the estate of Robert Walsh. I am ordering you to postpone any ruling on that claim until my investigation is complete. Harmon's face reddened. You cannot order me to do anything, Marshal. I am a duly appointed judge and I have authority in my own courtroom. You are absolutely right, Porter agreed. Which is why I am not ordering you as a judge. I am ordering you as a potential suspect in a conspiracy to defraud Miss Walsh of her legal property. Federal law gives me that authority, Judge. Now, you can cooperate and postpone the ruling, or you can refuse and I will have federal charges filed against you by the end of the week. Your choice. Harmon looked like he might have a stroke, but after a long, tense moment, he nodded stiffly. Very well. I will postpone the ruling pending your investigation. Good decision, Porter said. And I will need to see all the documents related to the debt claim. I want to examine them myself. As they left the courthouse, Willa grabbed Samuel's arm, her face lit up with hope. It is really happening, she said. He is actually standing up to them. Told you, Samuel said with a smile. Porter is the real deal. Their final stop was Edward Griggs's store. The merchant's face broke into a relieved smile when he saw them, especially when he noticed the federal marshal's badge. Thank God, Griggs said. I have been worried sick about what might happen. After that warning from Trent's men, I half expected to find my store burned down. Porter took a detailed statement from Griggs about his interactions with Trent over the years, including the merchant's observations of how other landowners had been intimidated and forced out. The marshal also asked about Simon Roth, the scrivener who likely forged the debt documents. Roth is a weasel, Griggs said bluntly. Smart enough to cover his tracks, but everyone knows he does shady work for Trent. If you can prove he forged those documents, he might turn on Trent to save himself. That is exactly what I am counting on, Porter said. A man like Roth, he is not going to go to prison for someone else's crimes if he has a choice. Over the next week, Marshal Porter worked methodically to build his case. He interviewed other ranchers and townspeople who had been hurt by Trent's schemes. He examined financial records and compared them against the disputed debt claim. And he put pressure on Simon Roth, making it clear that the scrivener was facing serious federal charges unless he cooperated. Through it all, Samuel and Willa stayed at the Fletcher Ranch, giving their statements and providing whatever help they could. But mostly, they spent time together, getting to know each other in ways that went beyond the crisis that had brought them together. They talked for hours about their hopes and dreams, their fears and disappointments. Samuel told her about his time in the war, the things he had seen that still haunted him. Willa spoke about the loneliness of being a young woman in the West, the constant awareness of being vulnerable, and the fierce determination to be strong anyway. They also talked about the future, about what they would do with the ranch once the legal troubles were resolved. Samuel had ideas about expanding the herd, about breeding horses as well as cattle. Willa wanted to build a real house to replace the small cabin, something with multiple rooms and a proper kitchen. "We will need space for children," she said one afternoon, then blushed furiously. "I mean eventually, that is, if you want to." Samuel laughed and pulled her close. "Yes, Willa, I want to have children with you. I want to build that house and expand the ranch and grow old watching our grandchildren play in the yard. I want all of it, as long as it is with you." 2 weeks after Marshal Porter arrived in Montrose, everything came to a head. Porter had gathered enough evidence to move against Trent directly, and he brought federal charges of murder conspiracy, fraud, and corruption. He also arrested Simon Roth, who, faced with the prospect of years in federal prison, agreed to testify against Trent in exchange for a reduced sentence. Roth's testimony was damning. He admitted to forging the debt documents at Trent's request, and he provided details about other illegal activities Trent had been involved in, including the barn burning that had driven the Morrison family away. With Roth's testimony and the mountain of other evidence Porter had compiled, the case against Trent was solid. Federal prosecutors arrived from Denver, and Trent was formally arrested and held pending trial. Judge Harmon, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quickly dismissed the debt claim against Willa's estate, ruling that the documents had been fraudulent. He also quietly announced his retirement, though everyone knew it was to avoid facing charges of his own. Sheriff Vickers was arrested for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. A new sheriff was appointed by the territorial governor, a man with an actual commitment to upholding the law. Through it all, Willa and Samuel stood together, witnessing the slow but steady collapse of Trent's empire. It was not quick, and it was not always satisfying, but it was justice, real and meaningful. The trial took place in Denver, where Trent's local influence could not reach. Samuel and Willa traveled there to testify, and Samuel held her hand as she bravely recounted finding out about her father's death and the campaign of intimidation that had followed. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Marcus Trent was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His ranch was seized to pay restitution to his victims, including a substantial amount that went to Willa as compensation for her father's death. When it was all finally over, Samuel and Willa returned to Montrose as the summer of 1882 turned to fall. The town felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. People who had been too afraid to speak to Willa before now greeted her warmly on the street. Several of the ranchers Trent had driven out were talking about coming back and rebuilding. On a clear October day, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, Samuel and Willa were married in a simple ceremony at the church in Montrose. Ben Fletcher gave Willa away, and Marshal Porter stood as Samuel's best man. Edward Griggs and Sarah Fletcher, and what seemed like half the town crowded into the small church to witness the union. As Samuel slipped a simple gold ring on Willa's finger and looked into her eyes, he marveled at how much his life had changed in just a few short months. He had started the summer as a lonely drifter with no direction and no purpose. But he was ending it as a husband with a home and a future worth fighting for. "I love you," he whispered as the minister pronounced them man and wife. "I love you too," Willa replied, her eyes shining with happy tears. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for asking me what happened." "Best decision I ever made," Samuel said, and kissed his wife to the cheers of their friends. They spent the winter fixing up the ranch, making improvements with the money from the settlement. Samuel proved to be as good with horses as he had claimed, and by spring, they had a small but quality breeding program starting to take shape. Willa worked alongside him, her grief for her father gradually transforming into a determination to make him proud by honoring his legacy. Marshal Porter visited occasionally, checking on them and updating them on developments in the various cases that had spun out from Trent's arrest. Several of Trent's former associates had also been charged with crimes, and the whole corrupt network was being systematically dismantled. "You two started something important," Porter told them during one visit. "Other people in other towns are finding the courage to stand up against corruption now. They are seeing that it can be done, that the law can work if good people are willing to fight for it." As the years passed, Samuel and Willa's ranch prospered. They hired help, including a young cowboy who reminded Samuel of himself at that age, drifting and looking for a place to belong. They gave him that place, and he repaid them with loyalty and hard work. In the spring of 1884, Willa gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy they named Robert, after her father. Samuel held his son for the first time and felt a terror and joy so profound he could barely breathe. This was what life was about, he realized. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom to build something meaningful with someone you loved. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Margaret after Samuel's mother. And 3 years after that, another son, James, named for Marshal Porter, who had become a close family friend. The children grew up running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough. Samuel and Willa taught them the value of hard work and honest dealing, and they told them stories about their grandfather Robert, making sure his memory lived on. Edward Griggs, now well into his 70s, became an honorary grandfather to the children, always ready with a piece of candy from his store or a story about the old days. Ben and Sarah Fletcher remained close friends, and their grandchildren played with Samuel and Willa's children, continuing the bonds of community and loyalty. In 1890, Colorado achieved statehood, and Montrose grew into a proper town with real law enforcement and honest governance. The scars of the Trent era gradually faded, though they were never completely forgotten. People remembered, and they made sure their children knew the story of how ordinary people had stood up against corruption and won. Samuel and Willa grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. The passionate intensity of those early days mellowed into something even stronger, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared history, and unshakable commitment. On warm summer evenings, they would sit together on the porch of the house they had built, watching the sun set over the mountains and the children playing in the yard. Sometimes Samuel would think back to that day in September of 1882, when he had heard a woman crying by the creek, and he would marvel at the path his life had taken. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked him one evening, as if reading his thoughts. "Stopping that day, taking on all the trouble that came with it." Samuel looked at her, at the silver threads in her chestnut hair, at the laugh lines around her eyes, at the strength and beauty that time had only enhanced. He looked at their children, now growing into fine young adults. He looked at the ranch they had built together, the life they had created. "Not for a single moment," he said, taking her hand. "That was the day my real life began, the day I stopped running and started living." Willa squeezed his hand and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Mine too," she said softly. "Mine too." As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Willa watched their children grow into adults and start families of their own. Robert, their eldest, took over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, showing the same careful attention to detail his grandfather had been known for. Margaret married a young lawyer in Denver but visited often, bringing her own children to run through the same fields where she had played. James, the youngest, had inherited his father's wanderlust and worked as a deputy marshal, though he always came home for holidays. In 1905, on a beautiful spring day much like the one when they had married, Samuel and Willa celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and they were surrounded by a community they had helped build and protect. Edward Griggs had passed away the previous winter at the age of 84, dying peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, Samuel had delivered the eulogy, speaking of the merchant's courage in standing up to tyranny and his kindness to a young widow when no one else would help. Marshal Porter, now retired, had moved to Montrose permanently, and he spent his days fishing and telling stories to anyone who would listen. He had never married, but he considered Samuel and Willa's family his own, and the children called him Uncle James. Ben Fletcher had died 2 years earlier, but Sarah was still going strong at 78, a fixture at every community gathering, and a source of wisdom for younger women trying to make their way in the still challenging West. On their anniversary, Samuel and Willa took a walk along the creek where they had first met, following the same path Samuel had ridden that September evening so long ago. The cottonwood trees had grown larger, and new ones had sprouted, creating a shaded bower that dappled the ground with sunlight. "I still come here sometimes," Willa admitted as they walked hand in hand. "When I need to think or when I am missing my father, I think about how lost I was that day, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you appeared like something out of a story." "I was just a lonely cowboy who heard someone crying," Samuel said with a smile. "Nothing heroic about it." "You are wrong," Willa said, stopping to face him. "Everything about it was heroic. You could have ridden on. You could have told yourself it was not your problem. But you stopped and you asked what happened and you refused to leave me alone. That took courage, Sam, and it changed everything." Samuel pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. "We changed everything together," he corrected gently. "I might have stopped, but you were the one who found the strength to fight back, to trust a stranger, to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. You are the hero of this story, Willa." "Then we are both heroes," Willa said with a smile. "Together." "Together," Samuel agreed, and kissed her there by the creek, in the place where their story had begun. As they walked back to the ranch in the golden afternoon light, Samuel reflected on how strange and wonderful life was. He had set out that September morning in 1882 with no destination in mind, no purpose beyond the next town and the next job. He had been running from his past, from pain, from the fear of caring about anything too much. But Willa's tears had stopped him in his tracks, had called to something deep inside him that he had thought was dead. And in helping her, in fighting for her, he had discovered who he truly was and what he truly wanted. The years had not always been easy. They had faced droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and crop failures, and all the other challenges that came with ranching in Colorado. They had buried friends and grieved losses and weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. But through it all, they had faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each challenge overcome. They had built not just a ranch but a family, not just a home but a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In the summer of 1911, at the age of 56, Samuel suffered a riding accident that left him with a badly broken leg. The doctor said he would recover, but he would always have a limp, and his days of hard ranch work were essentially over. It was a difficult adjustment for a man who had been active and physical his entire life. But Willa was there every step of the way, helping him through the painful recovery, finding new ways for him to contribute to the ranch that did not require riding or heavy labor. She reminded him, with gentle humor and fierce love, that his worth was not measured in how much he could do but in who he was. "You are my husband," she told him one day when he was particularly frustrated with his limitations. "You are the father of my children and the love of my life. You are the man who stopped when everyone else rode by, who fought for what was right when it would have been easier to walk away. A bum leg does not change any of that." Samuel pulled her down onto his lap, ignoring the twinge of pain in his leg. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked, not for the first time. "You heard a woman crying and asked what happened," Willa reminded him with a smile. "Everything else followed from that." By 1915, Samuel and Willa had 7 grandchildren, with another on the way. The ranch had expanded to include not just cattle and horses, but also a substantial farming operation. They employed over a dozen hands year-round, many of them young men and women who had come to Colorado seeking opportunity and found it working for the Crawford family. The town of Montrose had grown significantly, now boasting a population of over 3,000 people. There were schools and churches and businesses, and the old days of corruption and violence had faded into history. The story of how Willa Walsh and Samuel Crawford had stood up to Marcus Trent had become something of a legend in the area, told and retold until it had taken on mythic proportions. On Samuel's 60th birthday, the town threw a celebration in his honor, though he protested that he had not done anything special enough to warrant such fuss. Marshal Porter, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, gave a speech recounting the events of 1882 and the courage it had taken for one man to step forward when no one else would. "Samuel Crawford is proof that one person can make a difference," Porter said to the assembled crowd. "That doing the right thing, even when it is hard, even when it is dangerous, even when it would be easier to look the other way, that matters." His decision to stop and help a woman in distress 33 years ago changed not just her life, but this entire community. Willa, sitting beside Samuel and holding his hand, squeezed it gently. "He is right, you know," she whispered. "You changed everything." "We changed everything," Samuel whispered back, maintaining their old argument with a smile. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that are the common lot of humanity. They lost Sarah Fletcher in 1917 and Marshall Porter in 1919. Their children gave them more grandchildren, and then great-grandchildren began to arrive, tiny bundles of possibility that made Samuel and Willa marvel at the continuity of life. In 1925, at the age of 70, Samuel's health began to fail in earnest. His heart was wearing out, the doctor said, a common enough occurrence in men his age who had lived hard, physical lives. There was nothing to be done but make him comfortable and let nature take its course. Willa rarely left his side during those final months. Their children and grandchildren visited often, and Samuel took comfort in seeing how his family had flourished, how the legacy he and Willa had built together would continue long after he was gone. One afternoon in late September, almost exactly 43 years after that fateful day when he had first heard Willa crying by the creek, Samuel knew his time was drawing to a close. Willa was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand as she had held it through so many challenges and triumphs over the years. "You remember," Samuel said, his voice weak but clear, "that day by the creek, when I asked you to tell me what happened?" "I remember every detail," Willa said, tears streaming down her face. "I remember thinking my life was over, and then hearing your voice asking if I was hurt. I remember being so lost and so afraid, and then you said you were going to help me. You promised you would help me, and you kept that promise." "Best promise I ever made," Samuel said with effort. "Best decision I ever made stopping that day. You gave me a life worth living, Willa. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Willa corrected, echoing their old refrain. "We built this life together, Sam, every bit of it." Samuel smiled, his eyes drifting closed. "Together," he agreed softly. "Always together." He passed away peacefully that evening, with Willa holding his hand, and their children gathered around. It was the end of a life well lived, a life that had mattered, a life that had been transformed by a simple act of compassion on a September day 43 years earlier. At Samuel's funeral, the church was packed to overflowing with people whose lives he had touched. Robert, now 51 and gray-haired himself, gave the eulogy, speaking of his father's integrity, his kindness, his unwavering commitment to doing what was right even when it was hard. "My father taught me that heroism is not about grand gestures or dramatic moments," Robert said. "It is about showing up every day and doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. It is about stopping when someone needs help, even when it would be easier to ride on. It is about fighting for what you love, even when the odds seem impossible." He lived those lessons every day of his life, and he taught them to all of us. Willa lived for another 7 years after Samuel's death, and though she missed him terribly, she found comfort in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to live on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the physical evidence of their shared life. She often walked to the creek where Samuel had first found her, sitting under the cottonwood trees and remembering. She thought about how broken she had been that day, how certain that her life was ending. And she marveled at how wrong she had been, at how one man's compassion had opened the door to a whole new life filled with love and purpose and meaning. Willa passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1932, at the age of 73. She was buried beside Samuel on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Willa Crawford, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she found strength in love." Their children continued the ranch for many years, and then their grandchildren took over. The Crawford Ranch became an institution in Colorado, known for its quality livestock, its fair dealing, and its commitment to the community. The story of how Samuel and Willa had met, how he had heard her crying and stopped to help, how they had fought together against corruption and built a life worth living. That story was passed down through the generations as a reminder of what really mattered in life. And sometimes, on quiet September evenings when the light slanted golden across the Colorado plains, people walking by the creek near the old Crawford place swear they can hear the echo of two voices, a man and a woman, talking and laughing together under the cottonwood trees. Just the wind, the practical folks say. But the romantics know better. They know it is Samuel and Willa, together still as they always were, their love story continuing on in the land they cherished and the family they built and the legacy of compassion and courage they left behind. In the end, it all came down to a simple choice made on a September evening in 1882. A lonely cowboy heard a woman crying and made the decision to stop, to ask what happened, to offer help when no one else would. That one moment of human connection, that simple act of compassion, had rippled out across decades and generations, touching hundreds of lives and changing the course of an entire community. It was a reminder that we all have the power to change the world, one kind act at a time. That's stopping to help someone in distress, asking them to tell us what happened, offering them hope when they have none. These are not small things. They are the most important things. They are the acts that define who we are and what kind of world we leave behind. Samuel Crawford was just a lonely cowboy passing through when he heard Willa Walsh crying by a creek, but he chose to stop. He chose to care. He chose to act. And in doing so, he discovered that the life he had been searching for had been waiting for him all along, in the courage of a grieving woman and the possibility of love and home and belonging. That is the power of compassion. That is the gift of taking the time to ask someone, "Tell me what happened." You never know when that simple question might change everything, for them and for you. You never know when stopping to help might lead you to exactly where you were always meant to be. And so their story ends where it began, with a cowboy and a woman and a creek under cottonwood trees, and a question that opened the door to a lifetime of love. It is a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth living. Because at its heart, it is the oldest and truest story there is. The story of how love can heal, how courage can triumph, and how one person reaching out to another can create ripples that extend far beyond anything we can imagine. The Crawford Ranch still stands today, now run by the fifth generation of Samuel and Willa's descendants. The original cabin is preserved as a historical site, and the creek where they met is marked with a plaque that tells their story. Every September, the family gathers there to remember the moment that started it all, to honor the legacy of compassion and courage that Samuel and Willa left behind, and to remind themselves that every act of kindness matters, every gesture of compassion counts, and every time we stop to help someone in need, we are writing our own chapter in the ongoing story of what it means to be human.